Hello, everybody. Welcome to Culture Codes, the podcast. I'm Felicitas Olszewski, unpacking cultural influence at the intersection of brand, product, and innovation every week. You can find us on culturecodes.substack.com. Today, we're talking about disruption, but not in tech or generative AI. We're talking about chili peppers. Our guest today is Tobin N, a creative producer and brand innovator who spent more than 15 years working with giants like Google, Adidas, IKEA, and PlayStation. But now he's taking everything he's learned about storytelling, design, and culture and applying it to a bottle of sauce. Tobin is the founder of Renaissance, a line of 100% natural farm-grown sauces, condiments, and pantry items from Andalusia in Spain. He calls it healthy heat, a buzzy, clean warmth that's as much about wellness and culture as it is about spice. I have personally known Tobin for over 10 years, and I've followed the story of Renaissance closely from a road bike first in the Netherlands to my own kitchen counter here in the US. In this conversation today, we'll dive into what it really means to rebrand heat, to take a product in a saturated category and give it a new life through repositioning, design, story, and community. We'll explore how categories get disrupted, how cultural codes drive consumer behavior, and what every brand can learn from the way Tobin is building Renaissance. Let's get into it. Hi, Tobin. It's so great to have you.
Hello. Thank you for having me. This is going to be fun. And thank you for that intro. I feel very seen.
Very, very good. Very good. Well,
Yeah.
I've been anticipating having you on the pod for quite some time now, and here we are. So excited to dive into it. And a lot has happened since we last spoke, but also ever since you had the idea of building Renaissance. But can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself to start with? Your journey from what we alluded to in the intro, from film, gaming, tech innovation, advertising, into building a brand and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I guess where to start. As you mentioned, I'm in Amsterdam. You're in Los Angeles. I blame the time zones for us taking so long to do this. But I went to grad school for film and started working while I was still in school, actually, for PlayStation, directing and producing something called Game Cinematics. 6 or 7 years of doing that, I came to the Netherlands, to Amsterdam, to make a game with a PlayStation studio. I thought I would be here for a year or two, and I've been here for 13 somehow. That took me from PlayStation. I started working in advertising, specifically around creative technology, the non-traditional sort of campaigns. So whether that was, we put a VR installation on a bus, took it around Italy, or launched an AR app for IKEA, did all sorts of the stuff that was not traditionally, your film, TV, print. And that evolved into more of kind of like leadership roles that were more around how do we help traditional agencies evolve into kind of a new space where they can diversify the type of work that they can do and ideally expand the business and grow. That somehow, I guess, led me to entrepreneurship, but realistically, I mean, through the years, I've always had something on the side. So when I was at PlayStation, my partner and I back then would make music videos and short films and, spec commercials on the side on the weekends. And, out here in Amsterdam, I've made 2 apps on the side and, just tried different things. I feel like there's always something going on, something you wanted to make. It felt like I just sort of reached the point where I'm like, I have bad ideas too, and maybe I should really focus on this rather than spending all my time making the clients bad ideas. I can make my own bad ideas. So this is kind of like my effort to, I think, really give it a go and try to build something.
That's amazing. Did some of that work, spending time creating for some of these mega brands, creating ideas for them, lead you eventually to thinking I can do this myself and I want to build a brand of my own?
I mean, I wonder if a lot of it was, you've always got that thing and then maybe something happens. Maybe you reach a certain phase in your career. Some people, open flower shops or bakeries. Maybe this is my goat farm. I don't know. I don't like to think of it as that. I like to think of it as like something that is ideally, your purpose kind of aligns up with timing and where you are in life. And you go like, actually, this is right now way more important to me than whatever the next campaign will be for whatever big corporation. And I felt just getting back to something that was closer to actually building and making versus just ideas was important. And also, I think, like you're saying, with so many different startups these days, COVID was a big moment.
Yeah.
And like that was sort of literally and figuratively, I was working remotely for an agency out of Dublin. And in late 2023, when they were doing the return to office, they were like, it's really weird for us to have one of our leadership living in a different country. Like, we probably need you to move to Dublin. And so I had a decision to make, and I made it. And so we sort of kind of, had an agreement and settled and parted ways. And then that led me to go on a big adventure to
Yeah.
Spain, which led to hot sauce. And then it felt like the right time, and one thing led to another.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that story, I think, is fascinating, and how it is often for founders, a sequence of coincidence, which I love. But yeah, let's maybe start there. In your own words, what is Renaissance? Where does the name come from? What's the thinking behind it? And how is it different from what else is out there?
Well, that's, I think, what's most important to this project is that hot sauce is hot sauce, right? And I grew up in San Diego, and so it was always just part of the culture, really, the food. I mean, there's so much Mexican food. You're putting hot sauce on everything. And so moving to Northern Europe, you realize that there's a totally different, not even mindset, but just like people view what the product is totally different. There's fear involved. There's exoticism involved. There's a very low quality of the products that are available. And most of those are shipped in from the other side of the world, either from Asia or Central America, Mexico. And so what a lot of people associate with hot sauce has such a negative connotation. I could never really align myself with what it just was,
Yeah.
two different things. And so I'd always just bring my hot sauce over from this whenever I'd visit. I'd just load up, have half of a suitcase full of whatever I needed. And you started to see, I think, like so many trends, you started to see that grow in the States the last 10 years, probably out of what I remember in Southern California. Then you
Right.
start seeing it happen in the UK. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, I've seen this before. Like, it's like a script. Something happens in North America, it happens in the UK. Usually it'll go to Berlin and then come to Amsterdam. Like, we'll get spin class 3 years later. We'll get cold pressed juices years later. We'll get, like you name it. It's crazy. It's
It's
almost
very
like
true. Yeah.
clockwork. And so like I was looking at this and I was saying, I could see it, especially coming out of COVID and people traveling again, social media and the way people are eating. It was dramatically changing here in the Dutch culture from a very almost like, I mean, you've never had a friend say, hey, there's a new Dutch restaurant opening down the street. Let's go try it, right? Their food, they're not famous
Yeah.
for their food, but that in the time that I've lived here has changed so much that I was like, I could see this becoming a thing. And then beyond that, I could see this in Western Europe becoming more of a thing where people are expanding outside of what they know as just their standard cuisine. So you had all of that kind of going at the same time. And as I mentioned before, I'm in Spain, I'm on this trip, and it was bizarre, but I was out to dinner one night and I didn't know a word on the menu, and I Googled it. And then that led weirdly to this rabbit hole of a guy who's been making sauce in Andalusia for 30 years. He does it for restaurant groups mostly. So he's making these big tubs, and he works with this little network of farmers. All the farmers are within like 50K of each other. They're all near Granada. So I'm reading like blog posts about this guy from like 15 years ago. I'm like, who is this? So I just messaged him and I was like, sounds really cool what you're doing. And I was like, I think I might be in Granada. I wasn't going to be in Granada. And I didn't realize that Madrid, where I was, to
But you
Granada is
could
actually,
be.
yeah, could be, was like a 6-hour drive. Like, Spain is a huge country. So he writes me back and I drove down to his factory, and like, he was so confused by me, Felicitas. He was like, who are you? Like, what do you want? And I was like, this is for real what you're doing. I mean, he's making the sauce that's like, it's whole food. It's all natural, no preservatives, no powders, no fillers, expanders, nothing. It's just peppers grown in the ground in the sunshine and bottled. And what happens is it sounds silly, but the chili pepper is a fruit. Like, it's like tomatoes in Sicily or grapes to wine. Like, how you grow the fruit and where you grow the fruit dramatically changes the flavor. And so he was just, in my opinion, bottling for the first time that I'd seen in, 10 some years at that point in Europe, was the first time like, oh, this is sauce. This is what it's supposed to look like. And it went from there. I think that, I took a while of convincing him, actually, because I'm not his business, really. That's also part of building something, is you have to, do a lot of convincing.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I remember when you told me the story for the first time. And at the time, you were looking into experimenting with making some sauces, growing peppers yourself. But then the real unlock came through this through this now famous meeting at the time in Spain, and history was written from there, which I think is really amazing. What struck me, or being also originally from Europe and now having moved out here, I feel like we're sort of, almost like swapped seats,
Yeah.
trading places, is that I didn't grow up with a lot of spice where I'm from in Germany. Indeed, hot sauce had that connotation. It felt like a very manly, inaccessible space. It was all about endurance. And with the take that you have on Renaissance and flipping that to something more accessible for the European market, I think is really, really interesting and says a lot about how to enter in a category that's in one place oversaturated and in another one unknown, and how you sort of like take it and shape it as your own canvas. Where would you say you now? Do you have a flagship product out there? Do you have a product line out there? What is sort of like what does Rene look like at the moment?
Yeah, I think answering there's a good point that you were kind of alluding to earlier there, which was, the idea of like what I was doing when I was making sauce before starting this, a lot of that was just out of necessity. I think I am kind of fascinated with, I mean, I love salsa, to be distinct. Like, I've been making salsa for 20 plus years. Hot sauce is sort of a new thing for me. And that was more just kind of like, well, if it doesn't exist, I'm just going to do it myself and start playing around. And then you start getting into the world of it, and you realize the disconnect that idea of, like you were saying there, with competitiveness and like, the pain and suffering associated with chili peppers in Europe and Northern Europe. It's really bizarre because you don't have chili eating competitions in Thailand, or India. They're like, this is just food. Like, what are you guys doing? And so there was always this thing for me where I'm like, pain and suffering is a terrible way to market a product. So what is that? Like, let's do something that's completely the other way and start to get people to understand that it's like, this is something that's meant to be enjoyed.
Yeah.
It's something that complements your meal. It's something that adds to your meal. It's something that you cook with. It's something that you finish with. It's something that it has all sorts of different ways in. And the fact that it is such a global thing. So especially if you start exploring cuisines from other parts of the world, sometimes you're going to encounter new flavors, new tastes, new ingredients. And you start to realize that, yes, it's different in Austin, Texas, as it is in India, as it is in Thailand, but it's also kind of the same when it comes to the chili pepper. So they have all these very intricate ways and different ways of, I think, of incorporating it. And so that was really interesting. And I thought maybe this whole competitiveness and like, crying celebrities on YouTube and apocalypse and devils and demons, maybe it was turning off a lot of people. And maybe there's a whole big, broad world out there that and so that's who we want to talk to. We want to be talking to the people who are frankly are like, oh, I'm not a hot sauce person, and hopefully get them on the road from being like, no, that's scary, into, oh, this is more like a decent olive oil or a nice soy sauce. I leave it on my counter. It complements my food. It's something that's not scary, not embarrassing. And so if we can get into that space where it's like, you can eat healthy, and maybe that healthy meal you've created is maybe not that exciting, but with a couple drops of clean, high quality hot sauce, you can have that little bit of buzz. That's the world we're trying to get to, like is somewhere that has nothing to do with hot sauce, like the connotations that hot sauce carries. So like, we specifically on our bottle, we don't say hot sauce anywhere. We call it, if anything, habanero sauce or Reaper sauce, or, we try to have a distinction between, what it actually is and what everybody else thinks it is. And we're trying to make our own lane.
And which also creates your own brand world in that sense, as you're steering away from what is known to creating people's own connotations now with what you're doing.
There is, I believe that it's interesting because there's still so much behavior change that goes into just inherently with where we are in the world, with what our markets are. A lot of this is first, A, why this isn't scary, and then B, why we're better than Tabasco. That's the conversation, that's steps. And then it's funny though, because we'll go, like recently we were at a hot sauce, a chili fest in Antwerp. And when we go there, we don't really fit in with those people. Because it's all like rock and roll and devils and demons, and it feels in a way like there's potentially, you're starting to see other kind of sauce companies pop up and have also a similar kind of break away from that old way. And it feels sort of like craft beer was 20 or 30 years ago, where right now it's like a bunch of dudes potentially in a basement geeking out over, sauce and not realizing that there's this whole big world out there that could also enjoy this if it's just positioned differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like how you're describing how you're building, how you're reframing suffering, pain, everything that's known to hot sauce into something accessible, giving it that warm buzz, and making healthy heat in that sense something that people can access
Yeah.
and
Let's
have on
talk
the
about
counter. Yeah.
let's talk about benefits. It's like I feel like there's so many products in grocery stores in North America that are so clear with like, this is going to help you do blank.
Yeah.
You don't see that as much here, but you especially don't see it in our category. So I think we're borrowing pretty heavily from a
Right.
playbook that you in Los Angeles see every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think because people know certain culture codes about wellness, some of that, I would say gut health being on the rise, all of those topics, right? They might know certain benefits to spicier food like kimchi or other things that are more familiar to them. And now being able to then, I feel like the step towards something in that world yet different that could become their go-to olive oil, their go-to butter, their go-to mayonnaise, but it's a little habanero sauce is really, really interesting. When you're looking at the range that you have to date, how are you looking at what do you have right now? Like if I was to get my hands on Renaissance, what do you have? And then can you talk a little bit about the flavor profile of some of those and what you've been seeing in terms of consumer interest?
Yeah, I think our goal, and to add on to what I was saying before about hot sauce, our goal is we'd love to become more of a pantry brand, like
Mm-hmm.
something where you're seen as being like, oh, the brand represents a certain quality Mediterranean food, sunny, accessible, probably always a little spicy, but using ingredients that are just, it's just food, right? Real food. So we have, I think, 6 different SKUs in the hot sauce. We also do a couple different kinds of salt where we do something different. We don't dehydrate the peppers. We actually take pepper chunks and we cook them really hot into the salt. So it keeps a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the flavor. So if you're making like a ceviche or maybe you made a guacamole with avocados from Europe, you guys have much better avocados. But here you have a little bit of this habanero salt in it, it'll fix it. And so like,
Right.
and
That's interesting.
yeah,
It's almost like a little
yeah,
hack.
totally. And so then we also have a Reaper version of that that's way, way hotter, but it's almost like you'd cook with sambal. So if you're doing anything with a
Mm-hmm.
sauce, like a marinade or a rub, or you're doing a stew or a curry or chili, something that has a lot of flavors that can really open up, it's amazing. It's just a little bit and it'll really take off. But so we also started doing a habanero mustard, which is kind of funny because our bestseller, our habanero, has a teeny tiny bit of mustard in it. And the Dutch here have this obsession with croquettes and specifically something
I
called
do.
bitterballen, which are these little round fried. The rumor says there's mincemeat in them, but you don't really know what's in these things. And so you're sitting there drinking a Heineken in the brown bar and it's raining outside, and people order these bitterballen. It's a national pastime. And they dip it in what's typically a smooth French mustard. And so everybody started putting our habanero sauce. They kept hearing over and over, oh, we love this on bitterball. We love it on bitterball. And that's being kind of slow. It took us literally 6 months. And then we're like, wait, maybe we should make a mustard. And so now we made a mustard and we probably sell more mustard than the
I can
habanero. So
imagine.
it's,
Yeah.
yeah, and because again, to the point, we don't need to, there is no job to do as far as like explaining. Like the Dutch, oh, mustard, I get it. With hot
Yeah.
sauce, it's
It's
still
the
like,
gateway product. It's the gateway product into your range. That's how I viewed the mustard. Yeah. From a
So if we
strategy
could,
perspective. Yeah.
we have an olive oil actually right now that I actually have one right here. So those are Carolina
Amazing.
Reapers in a very, very high quality Andalusian olive oil. So that's just the same thing, couple drops in something and it'll totally change the dynamic of whatever you're cooking. Dynamic's probably the wrong word, but you know what I mean. Hopefully we can get into vinegars. Just again, it's something that I would love it to be. You've got your shelf or you've got your counter next to the stove or over the stove. I'd love us to be there. And
Yeah.
things that you can reach for when what'd be fun is if I take a little bit of that, the Renee salt, and I put it in here, that'll work. So that's kind of, I think, our North Star right now.
It sounds great. Can you talk a little bit about how much of what you've now talking to us about the product range is planned and what just comes through exploration? Did you have all of these things, oil, salt, mustard, planned from the start, or was that something that came out of, launching something and then trying it and doing it again?
So we've been selling now for, I did the numbers the other day. I think it's like basically a year and 5 months in
Okay.
total. And we've done close to 70 markets, chili fests, festivals, food expos in that time.
Yeah.
And it's like massively important. It's a lot of work, but like
Yeah.
talking to that many people. And it's so funny because like I remember when we were still, before we'd even launched, you insisted that we had to do a survey. And I fought tooth and nail. I didn't want to do a survey. Man, I don't want to do a survey.
I didn't want to bring it up today, but
Yeah.
I'm happy you're bringing it up.
And we got so much good information out of it. And it was so worth it and saved us so much time and effort and is just so valuable. But then you compound that with doing these food things where you're talking to hundreds of people at a time.
Yeah.
The feedback that you get is, it's just, that's where everything comes from. Like if you have an idea midnight and you're like, oh, we're going to do this thing. And you could just sort of get some labels printed, rush the thing out. And most of the time it doesn't work, but that's better than spending a year planning something. And it's like, just try, put it in front of it, see what the feedback is, see what people say, and you'll know right away.
I love that. I mean, we talk about this a lot here on the podcast, but also in the weekly newsletter in terms of the importance of insights, where they're coming from, knowing what your consumers want, and going based off that insight from a experimentation perspective. So thank you for sharing that. Is that one of the lessons, or maybe are there others that you've sort of like taken from, you've been innovating and doing a lot of big brand communication before, and now on this entrepreneurial side of Renaissance, what else have you been able to sort of carry over in terms of knowledge, lessons, or is it all completely new?
Sometimes it feels like it's all completely new and I have no idea what I'm doing. And that's probably true. Building a brand there are systems to it and there are processes, right? I had a conversation. I'm part of an incubator and they brought in somebody from Unilever who's been doing innovation there for 12 something years. And he was saying they forecast that it'll take you 7 years to build a brand in food. And so they work backwards from that. And I just thought that was fascinating, because in my brain, especially coming from advertising, you expect to build something in 6 months, right? And then it's there and it exists. And it's just not the way it works. And so when we went to market, we were convinced that healthy heat was the line, and that's what we are. That's what our brand is, and our marketing and what, talking about who we are was all going to be around that. And then what we've learned is we kind of had the pyramid backwards, and like premium is what resonates with the consumer. So the fact that I think most of our retail stores are in France, echoes that. For whatever reason, I think that the quality is one thing, but then also that concept of terroir, like where the thing is coming from and where it's growing is part of their food culture. And so, us being like, hey, we're growing in the ground in the sunshine of Andalusia actually makes a difference to a lot of people. Number 2 is food pairing. So talking to people and once you start, we're working with a food influencer right now who's from Sri Lanka. And she's all excited about using our mustard because every Sri Lankan dish starts with coconut oil and mustard. And so she's, working on a recipe and a video. Yeah. And then number 3, if you even get there in the conversation, is healthy heat. Is like, hey, you go to the gym, you go to some Pilates, you get an overpriced Buddha bowl and you're back at your desk, throw a little hot sauce on it. That makes sense, but it's not the main thing. So we spent a lot of time focusing on that when realistically, I think going out and talking was really where we would discover it. I think probably less innovation, even though that's the part that I gravitate to. So, we had 3 different kinds of salsa at one point. We've had all these different sauces we've tried. And in the last 6 months, it's really been, let's really kind of focus this down onto what we're trying to be. We can still try new things and that's important, but there is a balance between getting distracted and trying to do everything and really focusing on what a business. And then lastly, I think there's this behavior change products. They shouldn't be targeted at retail. So like for us, we still have a lot of things of explaining, and like retail is buying what people are already doing. So when we started the first year, all of our sales outreach was to like, okay, we're going to get in every epicery. We're going to get in every gourmet store. That's our target. That's our target. Let's go, go, go. And the reality is that who we need to be talking to are chefs, food people, food influencers, because they're the ones who then inspire people to try it. And then they try it. And then they go to the shop and ask for X, Y, or Z. And so we had that a little bit backwards. We had a lot of things backwards, but like, again, just you
Yeah.
getting it out there and talking to people is the only way to figure that out.
I think there's a couple of interesting things in there that you're saying. I think it's amazing that you have this early on amazing mentors from renownable companies who obviously know what they're doing, being big in the condiments world, speaking from experience. Secondly, the fact that you are thinking about earned media in that sense, influencers, food networks, that scene is interesting. And then thirdly, how you're describing how you navigate in, so to say, which I think is really, really interesting and inspiring, I think, to a lot of people who are wondering, what should I make? But this is already so crowded, and how do I stand out? And where do I even start? And what I'm hearing is, some of these things you have to get going and then kill your assumptions as much as you can, and trust the consumer.
There was a I think it happened within the last 2 months that was really interesting, where we're in 3 of these like very cool cheese shops that also do fancy sandwiches in Marseille.
Mm-hmm.
And a sauce fluencer, yes, they're out there.
That is
A
a word.
that is a word. That's what I'm calling her. A very lovely lady from Paris who her entire channel is just all she's making sauce, reviewing sauce with the French voiceover. It's amazing. It's good content. But so she went and she was, I guess, got a sandwich in one of these cheese shops on a trip to Marseille, bought a couple of our bottles, took a picture on the beach, tagged us, came up in our feed, and I'm like, oh, that's nice, and I liked it and whatever. Again, us being kind of slow, it took me a week, and then I was like, oh my gosh. And I write her, I'm like, hey, do you want samples, Celine? And she's like, oh, yeah, send me samples. So I sent her down samples, and within a week, she had a video up. And then that a day after the video goes up, we get a nice order from a store in Paris. And so it's like there's a circle there. And it was one of those aha moments where you're like, right, who is the right person to be talking to? Is it the store owner who runs a, 150 product shop in some village in Normandy? Or is it the woman with 50,000 people who love sauce as much as she does? And so
And
it's
do you
an
get to the
interesting
guy
world.
retail via her, right? Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting. So you touched upon a couple of things that you would have done differently if you were to do it again. Is there anything else you want to call out and specify?
Well, I think that I wouldn't say that this is so. I came at it when we first started. I came at it with a very North American approach. I'm heavily influenced by like Snack Shot and CPGD, but that's basic consumer packaged goods directory. And they're just putting, all of the new brands that are there's this Cambrian explosion happening in North America of challenger brands, which just isn't happening in Europe right now. And it's fascinating to watch the difference. Like I go into the grocery store when I'm home in San Diego and then come back to Amsterdam, and it's like somebody turned the color off when you go in the grocery store. It's literally that dramatic. You're just like, why are the grocery stores here so boring? Like, when will people like get that they're allowed to have fun food and be inspired when you go in the grocery store? And so I think that like that was something that was always part of, okay, cool. We'll bring that sort of packaging, that sort of brand. We'll drive it as a D2C to start with, and we'll do everything online. And I was coming from it from a sense that like in America, if we had our company in San Diego and we got an order in Maine, no problem. You've got Amazon, fulfillment by Amazon. You've got all sorts of 3PL options. It's not an issue. But here, if I want to send a bottle, if I get an order in Slovenia, which is not that far away, it's going to cost like 14 euros to ship it there. And if I want to go into Switzerland, they're not even part of the EU, let alone trying to ship something to the UK. These distances aren't that far, and there's technically 500 million people in the EU. It's bigger than North America, but you can't reach them. And there's all sorts of crazy things where it's like you essentially would have to almost set up a company in all these different countries. So I'm really trying to figure that out, because I think as a bigger conversation, where like what you're talking about all the time in your blog and just in our conversations is like, if culture comes from a very small thing that's like, addressed for a very small group of people and then usually expands out from there. Culture doesn't work the other way. It's not a
No.
big thing that
Yeah.
goes. And so I feel like that has a better chance of happening in North America, the small thing to go bigger and become more of a cultural moment than in Europe. Because
Yeah.
I think that it's just very hard for small brands, whether it's food or otherwise, to really have the same sort of like reach and impact. Some of that maybe is language, but at the same time, the internet and language is becoming less of an issue. So
Yeah.
I'd really like to figure out how we could become like a North American D2C, product brand in Europe. I think that seems like a very interesting challenge because it's going to be super relevant, not just to what we're doing, but to, I think, every brand out
Yeah.
there that's trying to come into Europe or trying to start something in Europe.
Absolutely. I think you have also, apart from what you just describing in terms of how you're building the brand, who and what it is, who it's for, it has a great name. I feel like it's, igniting to everybody somewhat intrinsically that, a new era is here, and sauce can be something else than what you might have in your mind about it to date, which is really interesting. And I'm all for your European, innovation venture um, and turning it around, which I think is really inspiring. Let's talk a little bit about how you're doing that to date. We talked a lot about brand. What does it mean to balance brand, but also operations, scaling from it started with one sauce to now all these other things, salt, mustard, you're talking about oils and vinegars. What does the team look like? What are skills that you could bring in? What are the skills that you had to sort of completely learn? And where you're borrowing advice that helps you do the things that you have to do?
So our immediate team is a lot of people that, you and I used to work with, frankly, a lot of ex advertising or still advertising. We have plenty of creative ideas on the team. Um, so a lot of the operations falls on me.
Right.
I think there's no shortage of strategy. There's no shortage of ideas. I've been really lucky, especially now I'm part of this incubator that I mentioned, but I'm also part of a big commercial food startup kind of consortium in Amsterdam that's 60, 70 startup food brands. And it's really cool to have everybody together, but you realize for people who don't come from like the creative industry, it's really daunting. Like, how do I talk? What is this thing? What do I like? It's not, they get stuck on name. Name is very hard, but like they can't even get into, the all of, I'm not saying I fully understand it either, but I recognize the fact that just being in advertising as long as we were, it seeps into you and you're like, okay,
Yeah.
go this direction, then that direction. So that's really nice. The hardest part of all of this is picking what the priority is every day,
Right.
because there's just so many things you can do that like you have to be very, very clear. There's a woman who I kind of look up to here who's really popped off on a chili oil brand, and she's super, super clear about like write down what you're gonna do it, and don't do anything else. And I think that's super good advice for this sort of stuff because it's easy at the start to get overwhelmed because in your brain you're already at phase 16 when you're really only at phase 2,
Yeah.
and you just can get overloaded. So yeah, I would also say that in there's like purpose, which sounds, I don't know, maybe too loaded, but it's true. You have to have something bigger than just
Yeah.
determination,
Like a
because if
reason why. Like, why am I
you
doing this and how am I going to
it's
be different? Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast with a woman who started Brightland, which is
Hmm.
the oil that's in Whole Foods. And she said something like, she's like, if you don't have a purpose, just won't make it because this is just too hard. Like you have to have something that's bigger because you're going to have the worst days ever. And you have to have that thing that's further. And sometimes like I could probably have a whole separate podcast with you about what my purpose is. I don't always know if it's super, super, super clear, but you do know what the feeling is. Anybody who starts something, like Seth Godin says in his book, The Practice, he goes, is a very generous act.
Yeah.
Like you're putting something out in the world because you're like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if blank?
Yeah.
And I think that is kind of, for me, the closest definition to purpose that I could have is just like, hey, this stuff's really cool. And there's a whole bunch of stuff with just beyond the taste and the flavor and what it does to our food. It's actually really interesting and very human and very global without getting too pepper geeky. There's only two mammals on the entire planet that eat chili peppers, and that's the Indonesian tree shrew and humans. Like from an evolutionary point of
Now
view,
that
they
is a
made
Trivial Pursuit question.
totally, right? That's Final Jeopardy. And like, but there's something to that because the plant thought, oh,
Absolutely,
I
yeah.
I want birds to eat the fruit and then take the seeds. It was an evolution thing, but ironically, humans have this insane relationship with the
Yeah.
chili pepper, and they took it all around the world. And because of that, now we have all these different veins of again of cultural resonance that have gone off because of this thing. It starts in food, but it matriculates in all these different ways, and that's
Yeah.
fascinating. Like I don't think we get that completely, and that's inspiring for me.
Thank you for sharing that. Now, after all these, all this time in and somewhat, a year and a half or two into having product at markets on shelves, your, outlined just now around having a purpose. Where do you see brand being right now? What does brand really mean to you in a world of, all the other things that you have to deal with? You talked a lot about the operational side as well. And how are you ensuring that the brand gets across in the different ways that you have to reach your consumer?
Yeah, I for me, I think it's most clear when I'm able to remind myself that like brand is what you are, marketing is what you do, right? And so when those two worlds get confused, it does get a little bit sloppy, and it feels like sometimes you're making decisions based upon again whatever.
Mm.
Back to one of our clients that we actually had back in the advertising days, IKEA, they have that very clear, a better everyday life for the many people. And they make decisions. They actually physically make decisions in meetings based around that.
Yeah.
And so I do think that having that brand, which is tied in with purpose and being like, this is who we are, and everything can go out from that, it does definitely make things easier. But then there's this other side when it comes to what the business is, especially being new to food, you start to realize that there is almost a hierarchy of consumer touch points, and brand has a different resonance with each of them. So if you're doing I don't know, like onion cakes. I don't know if onion cakes even exist, but let's say they do, something cakes. And maybe it's not important for you to have a brand. You're trying to explain to the bakery you're going to show up every morning with 100 and it's going to cost this much, and your product is good because you use nice ingredients and they can reheat it really quickly, and that's what you're doing. There's no brand conversation there. So
Yeah.
like, but at the same time, if you're doing what we're trying to do and you're in a shelf in a cheese shop in Marseille, I do think you have to say something, because otherwise, people aren't, they don't know who you are. They don't know what you're doing. They don't know, why is this different than Tabasco again? So like, I sometimes feel like you can get lost in the weeds of brand, but I
Mm.
also feel like if you're doing something that is driving behavior change, you have to have, I think it's a massive benefit to have a brand that is saying something.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Where do you see Renaissance go in the next few years, both in terms of product and the culture that you're trying to build?
I think maybe just echoing what I was saying before, where like I would love to build I'd love to build like a contemporary North American D2C brand in the EU. I'd love to figure that out. I think that, both commercially would be good, but it just seems really interesting
Yeah.
because it has a lot of, you have so many different markets and different identities in Europe. It would be pretty cool to have something that resonates in a lot of different places.
Mm-hmm.
I think just as, just that just seems fascinating. I think also too, if we can demonstrate that curve that I mentioned before, like where, oh, we see something happening over here
Yeah.
and then it happens over here, which is probably why I'm talking to you right now. Like that, again, the culture trend, I mean, trend's not even the right word, but spotting, hey, look, this is happening. That cycle um, just continues to accelerate and accelerate whatever the, brand consumer feedback loop, whatever, that it's spinning, and it's spinning way faster where you are than it is here, but it is accelerating here. I want to be
Yeah.
part of that
Definitely.
because I think that it's just beyond what we're building with this business. I do think it's it's important to any company that's trying to do something new in the EU.
Amazing. Fingers crossed. I'm all for you being one of those next brands. And I'm sure there's many other people who would like to break into the food and beverage space, maybe looking to disrupt the category, doing something totally new. What advice would you give someone who's just about to start out or a young founder?
I would say refrigeration or freezing, avoid. um,
Very practical
because,
advice. I like it.
yeah, I mean, it's hard enough for us to do stuff that expires in 2 years and is shelf stable. I can't
Yeah.
imagine
No, I
doing
have heard
something
that
that
a lot.
melts.
Yeah. Yes.
The other thing that would be nice and part of the bigger EU conversation is like, if you can figure out something that fits through the mail slot, you
Right.
are a massive step forward, because the price disparity there is intense. I said the thing about cakes and bakeries before, but I have seen through this food startup program I'm in, the companies that seem to work are consistently like sugary delicatessen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I
People like to treat
and
themselves still. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and especially if you're in like a touristy place like Amsterdam, there's
Yeah.
a million shops in the middle that are selling tasty somethings to tourists. And then I guess the most important thing is that like it seems to me, and maybe not for every single food type, but at least in our category, every single thing is volume, volume, volume from a business perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So like the unit prices and the change and stuff and that was something that I didn't fully appreciated when we started, was like you have to reach a certain level of sales in order for the wheel to start to turn.
Yeah.
And so that put me into a spot where I realized that most of my career had been thinking about advertising in a way, and specifically above the line advertising
Mm-hmm.
in a way where I'm like, oh, this is so important. It's the tip of the spear. And when you're actually starting something like this, you realize there's two sides. There's product and there's sales. And
Yeah.
then underneath sales is marketing. And like within marketing, there's a very nice to have, which is above the line advertising. So I kept wondering, I'm like, everything that I've done for years and years and years doesn't seem to apply here. And you realize that when you're starting something, it's like, how do I get that person to give me
Yeah.
money? So you start getting into like all the below the line stuff, discounts and coupons and 2-for-1s and like all of these different and bulk mailing lists and that sort of stuff. And there's luckily there's incredible tools out there right now. And also too, with just everything that's happening with the old, I guess we could call it AI in general, but specifically, the tie-ins with tech and how you're able to do your outreach and your CRM and everything. But that's the whole side of it that I'm learning. Like
Yeah.
I actually don't. Yeah, the approach to sales was something that is a big part of it. So when you start it, if you have that vibe, great. But if you don't, you need to work with somebody who does.
Amazing. Thank you for these insights. And thank you for unpacking a little bit today how you're disrupting a category, how you're bringing a new era of sauce into the mix and taking some of that West Coast, North America innovation spirit into Europe and the food and bev space. Thank you so much, Tobin, for coming on. This has been such a pleasure. Everyone, if you like this episode, then please like, share, and subscribe. You can find us on Substack, on YouTube, and on Spotify. And thank you, Tobin. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.